Good morning. Hey, happy Friday to you. Welcome back to the Old Fashioned Show. It is Fiesta Friday. It's my favorite day of the week. Make sure you hit the like button, hit subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Jeff Ketchum is joining me today for what has ended up being probably a topic that little did I know that would be such a firestorm, kind of a hellraiser kind of topic, but it's been one. And we've been in it, and there's been a discussion this week. And when Oklahoma hires Jim Nagy, excuse me, that's what? How did that affects Texas? And I went down a rabbit hole this week, and Catch went down one as well, where I think it was trying to find out what the hell does Brandon Harris do? And and I'll be honest, once it was unearthed and once it was uncovered, because I found that there's a lot of things that he did that I could be honest with you that was not privy to prior to going down that rabbit hole. But the value that Brandon has, I said something in our team, you and I talked this morning. I didn't know that would people be willing to fist fight for that guy, but there is a lot, and I'll break it down to a lot of the different things and that he does. But just starting from a general sense, a general conversation, behind the scenes, people value him and almost scoff at the notion that somehow Oklahoma has some advantage because they view Brandon as their rock star.
Yeah, that is the phrase that I've personally used. I use all the time with Brandon Harris. It's funny. Sometimes how you get to a place doesn't matter more than actually getting to the place. And so like what's happened this week is there's been, and I thought if you haven't read The War Room over on orangebloods.com, I'll tell you what, you can go click on it and read the whole thing right now. Even if you're not a subscriber to Orange Bloods, give you a freebie. You can go click on the War Room. You can go check it out. Every once in a while, you need to be able to see like, oh, this is what they do at Orange Bloods. And, we've been forever told how valuable Brandon Harris is behind the scenes. And yet, what does that mean? What does it look like? What does Texas ask of the man that has the title of GM? I don't know that we could give detailed answers fully until like there was a reason to like get all of the answers. And you spent a lot of time this week checking with a lot of sources. What does it mean to be the general manager of Texas? And, I think it's incredibly healthy that we do this. We have this conversation today. We'll go through the weekend. And I think Texas fans will be better informed about one of the real key pieces of the program than they've been before. And like, so how did we get here? Well, there's been this conversation about Nagy in Oklahoma and his skill set and what is the skill set of Brandon Harris? And is it exactly the skill set that you want in a certain role? So I think sometimes you just got to ask a bunch of questions and then you start to actually get some answers. And I think it's been a really enlightening process for all of us over the course of the last 72 hours or so. So it's like how we got here matters less than we're here. And I think in the end, we're healthier and more knowledgeable for having the conversations. And I think we'll continue to have them. And I think it's next level conversation about college football and Texas's place inside of it in the future. And you're probably not going to hear this exact conversation everywhere, but I would stress that I personally find it to be very valuable. And I've been looking forward all morning to this conversation because it is a continuation of we've already been talking about, but it's elevated because there are more answers, there are more details, and they're significant, way more than they're insignificant. So that's what I'll toss it back to you, and we can kind of talk about.
We'll start here, right? Which is Harris has emerged into Sark's right-hand man.
Yes.
Like you and I have always talked about who's in the inner circle and who's in the boat, right? If Sark has got to put a couple of people on the boat and lead them out, and it's the Titanic,
Yes.
and he's like, who's getting on the boat, right?
You're
And
either playing in the band or you got a seat on the boat.
So we know Jeff Banks is on the boat, right? We know Nansen is on the boat, right? We know those guys are absolutely on the boat. And what we didn't know going in was that Brandon Harris is on the boat. Like, and what that means is Sark leans on Brandon Harris a lot. Like a lot. Like that. And I think it's people think maybe, oh, well, Brandon Harris is just does some recruiting stuff. But what we've unearthed is my new word, by the way, since you said it yesterday. But what
I didn't even realize it. I was like,
yeah,
unearthed. Yeah.
Yeah,
I said that.
Yeah, you said it. So what we've unearthed is, I've been able to unearth is that, this is the guy that does all the heavy lifting. This is the guy who's in charge of not only the recruiting department, NIL department. He dabbles a little bit in the fundraising thing, maybe not a ton, but he also does those kind of things.
It's wherever he's needed, man. It is surprising how many hats he wears.
He wears a ton. And he literally is the person that Sark says, you handle that. Like, let me know what you do. Okay, cool. Then let me know when it's done. And that it is literally that. And so he has emerged, while maybe young in age, into the person that Sarks literally leans on the most, Catch. Like, out of all the people to handle all the administrative stuff behind the scenes. We're talking NIL deals. We're talking about retention. We're talking about the acquisitions. We're talking about him working with a salary cap. Like, we're talking about the scouting, and we have examples of things that he's, from scouting things, the negotiation standpoints. It's funny because when we had the conversation as relates to Nagy, everyone focuses in on the one thing, Catch, which is, hey, this guy's going to be a great evaluator of talent. And that may well be so because of what he's been able to do at the Senior Bowl. But the job itself entails so much more than just saying, I watched film and that's all I do. That this job is so much pressure filled. We'll get into some of the other nuances of having to be the bad guy, which is something that he does, and it has to embrace that role. So, but what I'll start with, that to Sark, he is probably one of the most important components for the program behind the scenes, like, because he pretty much does everything. And I think you've talked to some people that kind of verify that on your end too, right?
Yeah, I mean, you hear that all the time, but what does it mean? What does it mean to, like, he does everything, right? And I think that I thought, again, some of the detailed reporting, being able to be involved in the Matthew Golden recruitment, there are multiple components of what happens when you recruit a guy into the portal. Who negotiates the NIL deals and who aligns, we know that these things happen. What roles guys play behind the scenes to facilitate those things, I think, is just trickier. Like, these aren't things that they publicize. And so you dig around and you find out. I think what's really interesting is that I think there are a lot of roles behind the scenes. And I think that the biggest mistake that I've probably been involved in, and I don't know that I knowingly did this on War, but it comes down to kind of a good carpenter never blames his tools. And if my job is to be a communicator, and then I'm not communicating the message correctly or in a way that is clearly understood, then it's the person who's doing the communicating and not the person that's taking the information in that's to blame. And I think the way I kind of feel about it today is the conversation's been kind of framed as Brandon Harris versus Jim Nagy as if they're apple and apple. And it feels like if you are a college football program in 2025, the goal behind the scenes is to have a bowl of phenomenal fruit. But you need an apple, you need a banana, you need an orange, and you want all of those to be very good. I think the most disrespectful thing that's happened with regards to Brandon Harris is that I think a guy like Jim Nagy has a very specific and particular skill set. And the conversation has turned into that one skill set is bigger and better than all of the other skill sets. And I think, one of the things that makes Brandon Harris so valuable is that he might have 12 skill sets. And the one skill set that we know that we would say is Jim Nagy's probably superpower, right? He runs a scouting department. He's done the Senior Bowl. He will bring a very specific and narrow kind of, and he's been pretty open about it. When they interviewed him, he's like, yeah, I'm not going to be involved in the recruiting process. We're going to be doing this. The coaches will handle that. Well, you know what? Brandon Harris is heavily involved in the recruiting process. Like the hats he wears is different than the hats that Jim Nagy will wear at Oklahoma. And so it's not really a question of choosing which one is best. Is Jim Nagy's one skill set better than Brandon Harris's? It's like, no, you need all of those things. You need a Jim Nagy somewhere in your program, every program, a guy with that kind of skill set. But what I think title you give him is where I think we've gotten lost, because I keep joking. You could call somebody the grand poobah if it means they'll justify the money that they're going to spend on it. Titles are everything. Everybody in the program has one. And I think the problem that Brandon Harris has had, if there's been a problem, is that general manager tag is so big in sports, but only in the last 12 to 24 months in college athletics has it become a thing. And I don't know that people know how to outline it and really talk about it. And I probably include myself in that, Anwar. These are new conversations that we're having. What matters is that if you're a program like Texas or Georgia or Ohio State or Oklahoma or whomever, you want to have as many rock stars. You can't have a great rock band unless you've got multiple guys in it typically that are rock stars. The Rolling Stones aren't just Mick Jagger. The Aerosmith's not Steven Tyler. The Beatles aren't just one of John or Paul. You have to have all of the pieces. And the Beatles aren't the Beatles without Ringo. And yet we know that Ringo isn't John or Paul. But they all have these really important roles. And man, you better be great at your role. And I think Brandon Harris has 12 roles. Behind the scenes, people are savagely defensive and protective of him. They want people to know this guy does a ton for us. We cannot operate without him. And it's like, well, is he a better scout than Jim Nagy? And it's like, well, probably not. But that's not the point. Is Jim Nagy a contract negotiator? Is he a guy that would be involved in recruiting? Is he a guy that is a right-hand man and facilitates day in and day out the goals and things that Sarkisian needs done? Completely different jobs. Both have the same title. And it just, I think, is confusing for people to be what is a general manager? And I think we're getting lost in the weeds in the conversation. Not so much you as much as I've been in this conversation all week long on message boards. And, and it's turned into an either or. And I think it's really important when we come out of this conversation and we're done with it and we move on. I think people need to realize programs at this level need a lot of talented people. You can't have one, you can't have two. And I think one of the real interesting things that you brought up, and we'll get into in the discussion here before the show is over, is like, you know what? There are other people at Texas that don't get the fanfare or the criticism or the focus. The directors of recruiting and directors of this and directors of scouting, and some of these people have the skill sets that, or really the jobs that Nagy is doing, just a different title. Every person that you have behind the scenes needs to be elite, I think, in college football, or you put yourself into a position where the college head coach is being asked to do too much. And I think that's just where we are. It is part of what this conversation, it will become, I think, moving forward, is what will Steve Sarkisian feel confident sharing from a responsibility standpoint? Because instinctively, he wants to do it all. And also instinctively, he trusts Brandon Harris unconditionally. And like, it's no insignificant. I don't know that if Jim Nagy were on the Texas staff, would Texas be able to get the most out of Jim Nagy? Is that what Sark would want? Would he take that information in a way that maybe a different head coach would feel different about? Like maybe they didn't ask Brent Venables how he truly feels about this. Maybe that's not quite what happened. They decided this is what we need. And you know what, Brent, when you win more than 8 games in a season, we can let you, determine this. And I'm sure that they're going to work closely together, but what Texas has in Sarkisian's trust in Brandon Harris would not be easily replaced if Brandon Harris wasn't here. And I think that's the real value of Brandon Harris. You can say, well, Sark leans on him. Well, what does that mean? Because Sark, does he lean on, how many guys does Sark lean on? Not many. It's like, oh, well, if he left and his replacement came in, would he unconditionally have the same level of trust? And I think the answer is no, that is something that has to be earned with Steve Sarkisian, and that Brandon Harris has it so unconditionally means if you're Texas, you really have to keep him as long as humanly possible. And so,
and the thing is, Catch, too, as relates to that, I want to talk about like Nagy's superpower for a second, which is the evaluation, right? The evaluation portion of it. And this part is going to be the one where someone who's an Oklahoma fan is going to be like, "Oh, you're being a hater," right? But let's just talk about the superpower for a second, right? First of all, Brandon Harris played quarterback in the SEC, so he knows how to watch film. He's pretty good at it. Like if every quarterback can look at someone, see deficiencies, see twitches, things to that effect, and know those kind of things. He's been watching film his entire life, so we know you can evaluate from there. But here's the thing where I think when people start talking about the superpower, where they kind of get a little bit lost and don't understand how that translates to college football. And this goes into the thing that's been your baby for over 2 decades, which is the need to obtain super blue chip prospects. And you're not going to be able to build a roster at Oklahoma or any major SEC program if you think I'm going to moneyball this thing. I know everybody's going to go after those 5 stars and 4 stars, right? All those guys. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to go in here to Indiana, and I'm going to go to Montana, and I'm just going to find all these secret gems because I watched all this film, and we're just going to offer a bunch of guys that nobody else is going to offer. That's not how it will work. And if you go that route, you're going to get your ass kicked. Oklahoma will need to go after the same guys that Texas goes after, Ohio State goes after, Georgia goes after, there will not be this massive advantage in recruiting that he's going to go after people that no other program is even going to know about. They're like, this guy could have been a 5-star. No one knew about him. No, that's not how it works. And here's the other thing, as you know how recruiting works. Even if he, in a transfer portal, unearths somebody from Alabama A&M. Well, guess what, Catch? The moment that kid tweets out, so blessed to receive an offer from Oklahoma, he's basically sounded the sirens for everybody else to circle the wagons and say, if they didn't know about him, well, they know about him now. Remember how Texas all those years that they would be scared to offer a guy, Catch, because they know the moment the kid tweets out, I got a Texas offer, all of a sudden everybody's going to jump on it. It would be the same thing as relates to Oklahoma. The thing that when it comes to that, the scouting and recruiting part of it, it still boils down to the relationships that you have with a kid. Like that's what's going to be able to do it. Seeing him is one thing. You'll see him, but you're going to still have to like develop relationships, maintain those relationships. Like those are the things you have to do for weeks, months, years, like day in and day out. People told you Brandon Harris works 18 hours a day. So what I'm saying does not necessarily negate Nagy and what he's able to do, but understand he won't be doing something that Ohio State's not doing, that Georgia's not doing, that Ole Miss is not doing. It's not like he will find these guys that nobody else is going to find out or be after. Oklahoma still has to find a way, Catch, to win the super blue chip guys, because at the end of the day, you can't win in college football unless you have the super blue chips.
Oh. Can we just stop for a second and like soak in this moment? Because I just warmed my heart to hear you say that. It is about the super blue chip Jimmys and the Joes. Just because you're not wrong. You are so right. Look, this is a sport where Nagy's value for Oklahoma is that, for me, they can't compete with the reason why Oklahoma is in this trouble spot that they're in is they can't compete with Texas and Georgia. Not really. There's such a difference between a top 10 class and how, because I've said it for years. And people don't like to hear it, but they're okay with it now because Texas has elevated beyond this point. There's the top 10 class in the country is not much different than the top 30 class in the country. None of them are comparable to a top 5, top 3, number 1 type of class. And the reason is because of the super blue chips. Those are the guys that, if you're Texas, you would not trade the capacity to recruit elite level prospects like Texas has for the opportunity to find sleepers. I mean,
yeah,
it's really important, I think, for a program like North Carolina, right? Think about what Bill Belichick has to do, who he has to recruit against. And if he wants to say, look, the most important guy in our program is Michael Lombardi, and we're going to pay that guy $1.5 million, their need for Michael Lombardi to find talent that others aren't finding, that's what you do when you can't get the talent that everybody kind of wants, right?
Yeah.
When you can't afford Neiman Marcus, it's funny. I was talking to this woman the other day. She's a designer, and she can't afford the stuff she wants to buy, so she makes it. It's kind of what Oklahoma has to do with Jim Nagy, right? It is. Now, I think that would be insanely valuable for Texas, but in a different kind of a way. It's probably for Texas having a guy like Nagy who could elevate the bottom of your roster, go to Montana or find some Could those guys play for Texas though? Like, can you, for a team that just sent 15 guys or 14 guys to the combine, like, does that guy help Texas? Like, did Javion Cole out of San Jose State help Texas this past year? It's like, no. The answer ended up being no. And why was the answer no? In reality, he just wasn't quite at that level. Now, that doesn't mean that those guys can't be found. But at a school like Texas and Ohio State, it is much harder to find or unearth players all over the country who, even if you find somebody who's really talented, are they talented enough to beat Ohio State in a national semifinal? Are they good enough to beat Texas in a national semifinal? And I think,
can you beat Georgia in an SEC championship game?
Or can you beat Georgia in an SEC regular season game? Like, this is the task that Texas has on it. I think having an elite guy, whether his name's Jim Nagy or Jim Bob Muffet or Jimmy Joe or Jimmy Johnson, like, it doesn't matter. You want to have whoever you're hiring, you want them to be as talented, as good at what they do. But I think inside of the Texas program, you would rank your needs probably different than Oklahoma. And Oklahoma has made their general manager hire, and they've given this guy the title based on his ability to find talent. Well, why do they need him to do that? And how much of it do they need him to do? We'll see. And we'll see how successful it is. And I think if you're going to go with that approach, because you need to, I think Oklahoma went out and got as good of a guy as they're going to get. But it really, whenever you hear people say, like, man, I got some real insight into your soul. I think these programs are telling us, or they're allowing us windows into their souls as programs. And the Texas soul looks a little different. Its number one needs are a little bit different. What it's going to require of Brandon Harris isn't the same thing. This is different. And consequently, Brandon Harris at Oklahoma might not be as valuable as he's insanely valuable at Texas. Because what good would it necessarily be to have Brandon Harris's skill set that he's right? I mean, if you can't get Isaiah Bond in the portal, and Oklahoma hasn't really proven that they can, then they got to go find somebody who's, you know what I mean? Like, Texas gets to shop at the rich kid stores. And when it's over with, they get to, like, hey, we got our 5-star. And it's like, oh, well, we wouldn't find a guy at Idaho State. And it's like, oh, good for you. We're going to keep our guy. We're not, like, envious of you at all for it. It almost feels like, good for you. We're cool. Meanwhile, Oklahoma really can't sit around right now and play the game that Texas is playing. If they do, they will lose. Oklahoma, and we've learned this very quickly, and it's happening, and the gap is only widening at this point. They really, in this new world of college football, cannot compete eye to eye with Ohio State, Texas, Georgia, Alabama. They rushed the field when they beat Alabama. That's who Oklahoma's become. They're a field rushing team against the big boys when they win. That's who Oklahoma has told us they are. And, like, I am a big fan of this hire of Nagy, but I think the more and more we inspect what it means and what these jobs entail, and at each program, because look, the one thing I think, if I was Sark, if somebody asked me about this in the spring, I would go, I don't see Georgia and Ohio State doing this yet. And that's a fair point. And it emphasizes, you know what? Right now, those programs don't need the same thing that some of these other programs need. I do think eventually having someone of that ilk in your program at Texas, at Ohio State, at Georgia is going to be insanely valuable, because it might only impact 5 or 6 guys on the roster each year. What having that type of personnel inside your football department, if you're Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, it might not even be that large of a number. But it might be that those 6 players that scouting department has given you change, maybe instead of 11 games, you win 12, or maybe instead of 10, you win 11. Or if you're Oklahoma, maybe instead of winning 5 or 6, you win 7 or 8. And that at that point, that becomes huge for them. And it becomes, I think, huge for North Carolina. If look, when they were under Drake May and Matt Brown, they couldn't get over the hump. They were like an 8-4 team, 9-3 team, wishing and hoping that they could be something better than that. They don't have the Jimmies and the Joes. They can't beat the programs that simply out-talent them. So they've got to try to find a way to cheat the margins, and this is a way that they can do that. But I think it's important to note, and I think it's the single most important point that you could possibly make. Texas doesn't need to cheat the same margins. I was as big of a JV. I loved it last year when they went to, and I don't want Texas to stop taking these shots. I loved it when they went and got Javion Cole, because I was like, you know what? That dude was a really good player at a small level school. He's better than San Jose State. And you know what? That guy might be SEC good, but it's different. SEC good and Georgia and Texas good are just different things. There's an even bigger difference between that than, I think, is he Big 12 good or SEC good? Like, I think there's a bigger difference between Texas and Georgia and the rest of the SEC than there is between the SEC and all of the other major Power 4 conferences. And it's kind of crazy that in such a short amount of time, Texas is in this position. Because I think 5 years ago, Jim Nagy, you would probably think to yourself, Jesus, Texas only has like 7 super blue chips on its roster. They get like 1 or 2 a year. You know what they need to go do? They probably got to go find themselves a Jim Nagy who can find them some talent, because what they're not getting are the elite guys. And so, you know, I have a different just vibe about this whole conversation and philosophical debate. It's evolved over the course of the week, because you can really start to rank inside the Texas program. What do they value the most from a need standpoint? It's not the same as Oklahoma. And it's crazy that in such a short amount of time, they've completely boxed out Oklahoma, where Oklahoma's not their peer. They're not. Otherwise, they wouldn't have just hired a general manager that's going to be going to try to unearth these crown jewels hidden under rocks in states that Texas won't send people to even look at. Oklahoma has to do that. So you better find somebody that might be really good if you have to do that. Texas ain't got to do nothing but keep being Texas and getting super blue chips. And then you don't have to find guys at Montana State. That's just the reality of the conversation. The need to go into far outposts all over the country and desperately try to find guys isn't quite as high when you can just go take some 5 stars and pay them a bunch of money and then let it be
right.
that.
And think about this. Think about this from a transfer portal perspective, right? That's staying with your thing, right? Texas tried, and it went Devin Richardson, small school. Maybe he could transfer here. What did that amount to, right? Diamante Tucker Dorsey, right? The same thing. Like, oh, well, what he did some good stuff over there. What can he do here, right? Gavin Holmes, right? The same thing. I can go down this list of. Ooh, yes, but at the
Matthew
end,
Golden, right?
But that's what I'm saying. But you know how you win? You get Andrew Makuba, you get a Trey Moore, you get Matthew Golden, right? You get your Silas Bolden, you get your Isaiah Bonds, right? You get a Savea, you get Bill Nortons, right? That's how you do it, Catch. You going and getting the big dogs. You get an Adonai Mitchell out of there. To a certain degree, Trill Carter was somewhat respectable, but I can go down the list, Catch. This is how, if you look at Texas and the success that they've had, a Ryan Watts, I don't know, a Quinn Ewers. If you look at it, it's a lot of the success that Texas has had out of the transfer portal has been guys from the big programs. And everyone who's trying to, it's like, to your point, let me find this flea market kind of value And it's like, oh man, it's like if I go to this, not even the flea market, you go to the yard sale, and I'm like, man, maybe I'll be able to find that Babe Ruth card in this old man's collection. It's like, probably not. You probably got to go on eBay. You're probably gonna have to go on eBay if you really want the card. And so at the end of the day, if you look at just the last few years, Texas has tried. And Texas has tried with some of these guys like the Javion Coles, the Devin Richardsons, where all these guys I mentioned. But at the end of the day, this is why I keep going back to, you've got to go and get the super blue chip, big dog kind of guys. And the ball is, and then you got to be able to win those guys. Like, you're not going to win. You're not going to field a successful team in the SEC by thinking, I've got somebody, Alabama's A&M's roster, because guess what? Alabama A&M ain't going to compete against these teams. Not 22 of them. Like, you'll get your ass kicked. You've got to be able to compete against the big dogs, and this is where it becomes more challenging, I think, from the superpower conversation, because you also got to be able, and then even if you get them, now you still got to be able to negotiate NIL. How many times and you're really in tune with a lot of the NIL stuff and the NIL conversations. These guys want to get paid, Catch. All these guys.
I don't know about Brandon Harris, that it may be, and the answer to this question may be that he's the guy, and I just don't know. But I do think one of the things, if you're Texas and Ohio State, Georgia, I don't know that the science of, if we've got $25 million minimum annually to spend in a year, who's the capologist? Who's the person that determines what positions are valued at certain price points? Who gets, raises? Like, it's really interesting to how those decisions get made. And I think long-term wise, you want to have somebody elite of the elite. I don't know who these people are. I don't know who the Dallas Cowboys capologist is, but it might not be the general manager, and it might not be, the director of scouting. It might be somebody that's like, hey, you know what Jimmy does? Jimmy's the best counter and is a guy that like takes the algorithm of how we need to shape our roster financially. Like, there are little things like this.
But we know who the capologist here is at Texas, though. It's Brandon Harris. But
honestly, I don't know if he's elite at that, because I don't know how you would even define that. Like, I'm not saying he's not.
I can tell you how it's defined to me, the talent that Texas has on its roster. That's how it was defined to me. Like, because the one thing that I heard this week, I've heard this for a while, from especially as relates to agents. Some agents don't like him. You know why they don't like him? Because he tells them no. And you know who doesn't like people tell you no? The people who want that money. Like, we all worked in businesses where we hate, like, the accounting department, right? And we've called them bean counters. And we all hate that, right? Because you're like, you're supposed to, have a per diem to go out, but they're like, where's the receipt? And they're like, well, you can't spend more than $40 out when you go out, and things to that effect. You're like, I hate these damn bean counters. But you know what the bean counters are doing? They're saving money for the company when it's all said and done. And Sark allows Brandon to kind of determine who gets paid what and who doesn't get paid what. And Sark doesn't sit there for the roster of all 85 guys and says, all right, let's figure this thing out. Like, he lets Brandon do it. And the one thing that that does happen is that people get frustrated, and they're like, well, of course, we want more money. When the season ended, the season was done, Cotton Bowl is over, everybody's like, we want to get paid. Every single person's like, I want my money. And you had to have a guy who said yes to Trevor Gooseby, yes to Colin Simmons, yes to Anthony Hill, but told some other folks, nope, Can't get it. Nope. If you feel like you want it, you either go to the draft or go in the market. There's this hard decisions that have to be made. That again, this goes beyond the scope of just scouting. There's a lot of other things. To your point, who does it for Oklahoma? Don't know, but we know when we was talk about the hats that Brandon wears, figuring out who gets paid what it falls in line for there, and figuring out, hey, how do we get a Jamie French and a Kalik Lockett if we don't get a Decorian Moore? And how do we allocate those funds, right? Those things fall 100% in his lap. And sometimes it's hard decisions to be made. Sometimes guys get rewarded, but he's never afraid to be the bad guy, because sometimes when you're the bean counter, you are the bad guy.
Anwar, I could honestly do this for like the next 5 hours, but I got to go. I will. Thank you for letting me come on and join you today.
Sure. You can continue the conversation at noon if you need to.
I might very well do that. Matter of fact, guys, you just expect on some level that conversation to continue, but I'm going to let Anwar finish up his. Anwar, take the next couple of days off. Enjoy your weekend. Guys, if you haven't been paying attention to what Anwar has done as a reporter in the last, and I told it, I'll say this on, I literally, first words out of my mouth in that conversation yesterday, and Anwar's response was, I was like, man, you've had a great week. And Anwar was like, I've had a great month and year. And I was like, touche. But in the last month or the last week, I think he's broken 3 stories that have received national attention. His war room stuff last night was detailed and a level of information that nobody else in the market has ever come close to outlining. The general manager, like, it's a big deal. What does he do? I'll let you go read it for yourself and find out how valuable you think that information is. He had team notes this week. Like, I just think Anwar's performance in the last week has been sensational on top of the normal sensational. And I wanted to give him his flowers on his own show, because if you guys are watching this show and you're not fully aware what you have from an information standpoint and who's giving it to you, and that no one else is giving it to you, like, you should know that. So there you go. Now you do.
Well. Wow. No, go ahead.
We'll see you on Monday.
Okay, all right. You guys have all right. I'll go ahead, Coach. See you soon. I'll give you these guys a couple of more nuggets here. So, like, one of the other things, I was giving a good example of the value of a guy like Brandon Harris, right? And I was told that Brandon Harris was kind of the guy, even though Texas had some previous relationships with him, that Brandon Harris was a guy that really said, look, we need to go out and get a Matthew Golden, right? And it really made that happen. And one of the things I was told behind the scenes is that, as far as, when you have to wear different hats, is you can scout the talent. That's one thing. Now you got to figure out what this person's worth and what their market value is. And I was told that he was able to negotiate an NIL deal to bring in Matthew Golden for $200,000. I'm going to give you a point of comparison. Jordan Addison, when he went into the market and left Pitt, was asking for $1 million. Texas was able to get a guy who essentially is going to be a first-round pick. Arguably could be the first receiver taken off the board. We'll see. Like, you never know what's going to happen for draft. And the people behind the scenes credit Brandon with really negotiating what they consider to be a steal of a deal when you look back at it and you think about what people get paid in NIL nowadays. To be able to get somebody for that price was considered, is still considered something that was absolutely amazing. It's funny, like they said, when we've talked about the scouting issues and the scouting conversations, they've brought up to me like, hey, and again, I said this early in the show, but it bears to be repeated again. Brandon played quarterback in high school, played quarterback in college, started it obviously at LSU. He also is a guy that obviously was an assistant here under Tom Herman. That's when he starts out. And so, what quarterback have you ever seen that's been able to start can't evaluate talent? Right? I mean, we're just using logic. We're not saying anything simple. We're not saying anything fancy. But what quarterback do you know can't dissect film and look at someone's strengths and weaknesses? That's their job, is to see everybody on the field, offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball, right? That's exactly what these jobs is able to do. So they can tell me, like, hey, from a talent evaluation standpoint, this guy is top notch, right? He does what he does. So they don't look at like, oh, we're deficient in that department. They admit, hey, he's young, he's 29 years old, but that doesn't necessarily he lacks credentials or can't do the job. It's interesting that I did not know until I went down this rabbit hole. I'm going to give you something that I think very few of you might even know about Brandon Harris. And this is for the Texas fans more so than it is for the Oklahoma fans. Well, this guy's leading an apartment. He's leading one of the richest departments in all of college sports. And, and of course, he's leading one of the wealthiest college football departments. Did you know that Brandon Harris actually has an MBA from UNC? I didn't know that. I know that now. Go look. It's on his LinkedIn profile. But he actually has an MBA from UNC. So he actually has a business acumen that actually is great when it comes to arts of negotiations and understanding things. There's a resume that's full of things that the majority of us just have no clue about and have never really dove into, but they've told me like this guy is more than qualified from a business standpoint, from a football standpoint, from a fundraising standpoint. I was told how much money he raised, and then I was told I needed to redact that. They were like, I want you to give. They're like, don't give everybody an advantage on how much money we're working with. I'm like, oh damn, my bad, my bad. I had to take that one out, right? And then I think the thing that you're talking about there, Guadalupe, as far as being able to relate to players, there is a thing, and I won't, I don't want to do too much of comparison, but I'll talk more about Brandon than I will about Nagy. Is that there is a recruiting aspect that goes into his job specifically, right? Which is, someone gave me a good example that in order to seal the deal, these are good nuggets for you guys, okay? Or in order to seal the deal with Jonah Williams, the 5-star, in order for Texas to get him, he had to sit across the desk from Jonah's dad, who is a judge, by the way, and make sure that pitch was solid and done. It's not to say Sark didn't recruit him and everybody else. I don't get that. But they told me that Brandon had to be the closer in that deal. So now there's talking about this relatability, right? This relatability in order to be able to talk and communicate. And again, it goes beyond, okay, well, yeah, sure, you looked at the film, great. You identified somebody, that's great. Now let's do these other things that you have to do. And they look at him, what he's able to do as a guy, I don't know, who's in charge of recruiting at one point. And it's able to then be able to get on the phone. Like these coaches aren't on the phone. Like these coaches are on the phone, but he has to be on the phone. Like there's a lot of different things there's a lot of different hats that are worn. But from a recruiting standpoint, that's another hat that he wears. And apparently he wears that well. So I talked about the art of negotiation and being able to decide who gets what, who does not get what. You have to be able to make these hard decisions, right? You have to be able to talk to agents, and you have to tell agents no. Like, this is not a world where every agent's going to like you, because the agents are like, we want to get money. We want to get money. I want to get my guy paid. Because if I get my guy paid, then I'm going to get paid. And so that's a world that you live in. But it's also a world that you have to be able to navigate successfully. Like there's a shrewdness that goes about this, but there's also an understanding of what you're able to do. And kind of one of the last things that would throw out there that was unearthed recently is that one thing that most people didn't know was that this is kind of behind the scenes things, but I'll let it be known for you guys here, is that he was actually, Brandon, actually offered an NFL assistant GM position during the offseason. And they didn't tell me the team. Sometimes they don't want to do that because they don't want the person who got the job to feel like they were the second choice. Like you always want to make someone feel like they were, you don't get a job offer from somebody and say, well, listen, we offered two people. They said no. So we just want to know if you're interested. Right. So that's it, and he turned it down. He got rewarded financially in Texas. It still gets to be the GM here. Now, so the NFL has been calling. The NFL has been recognizing what he's been doing. And there was a thing that I did not put in last night, but I could definitely put in there, is that when I say about Sark kind of leaning more on Brandon for certain things as the GM, he's also the guy that's in charge of negotiating now with the coaches in their coaches' contracts. Like that's been another thing that's been put on his plate. So when you start thinking about all the hats, and I think there's a lot of hats that were on the table that the majority of us didn't know, but now we're talking about NIL. Now we're talking about negotiating coaching contracts, right? Player contracts, right? We're talking about fundraising. We're talking about scouting. We're talking about recruiting. We're talking about development, right? We're talking about all these other things that this is what the GM here at Texas has and does. It does it so well. It's so good to the point where Sark rewards him financially. Like someone explained it to me and it was real simple. They were like, do you really think that Sark is going to reward someone financially that just can't do the job? That he's got to carry along? Like he's not that guy. They said, trust me, he's not that guy. He's not going to just give some guy some money just because. Like Sark is saying, like he is telling you, with all the connections that he has and all the money that Texas has, that this what he has here is not some sort of comfort hire, but he's has someone that he considers to be one of the best and the brightest in the business. And so if he has someone that he believes to be the best and the brightest in the business, handles just about everything that needs to be done behind the scenes. I think if you, as a Texas fan, look and see what's going across and what's happening on the other sides, then you would have to tell yourself, Sark has done a really, really good job. And he's telling you that, hey, this is exactly what I want. This is exactly what Texas needs. And if he's telling you that, then I think you have to believe that and understand that we can always say that Sark's probably being one bad hire, maybe Andre Coleman. And outside of that, I think we all agree that every hire has been a good one. Oscar, I know you gave this super chat a little while ago. Because in my opinion, there's a big difference between Sark running the program and having Brandon Harris help him run it compared to OU hiring Nagy to kind of run the program while Brent Venables coaches. Am I wrong in how I see it? Okay, let me read that again. I mean, I know how they, Oscar, how they have that thing set up is, so yes, Brandon is helping him run the program. Like, let's be clear. He has a boss. Sark is the boss. Like, come on. Like, don't be crazy. Like, it's not like Brandon's out here doing things and operating in the world where he's like, he still has to answer to somebody and he still has to make decisions that with all being said. But I think the bigger the thing is that you have to know, Oscar, is that at the end of the day, he wears tons, and that's our kind of outline. He wears tons and tons and tons and tons of hats. And that's the main thing that you have to know. And it's good enough for Sark. So how they do it, and how the Nagy does it is will be fine. I guess the biggest thing that I want you as a Texas fan to know is I don't feel like at the end of the day, Oklahoma has now somehow gained some sort of huge advantage over Texas in the GM department. That's just not true. None of it's true. None of it's true. And so we'll see what he does. And again, there's no disrespect to Nagy. It's more of me talking about Brandon and what he's been able to do. And if you think Oklahoma has some huge advantage, they don't. They don't. They're still going to have to. They're still going to have to compete against the guys that all the big dogs want. And again, you can try to moneyball if you want to. It's not going to work. Not in the SEC. Go get your ass kicked. Just you go to get your ass kicked. And you think like if Oklahoma's going to go the way of Vanderbilt, well, good luck. You know, you're going to be at 6-7 wins, every year. If you're just like, well, let's find our Diego Pavia out the transfer portal. Okay, cool. That'll help you. But when you're talking about trying to compete for titles, which they do really well in other sports, when we talk about football and getting back to once were, it's going to take getting the big dogs. So we'll be interested to see how that goes. Xavier, you wanted to know if you had a really, really off-topic question about who the starting 5 offensive linemen might be. Give me Xavier. Ask you that. I got you. I'm gonna make sure we get that addressed in some other shows for you. I don't know if I'm in the mental space of that particular thing. I mean, we know where Gooseby is, and there's some other guys in the mix. I don't have the depth chart in front of me, so I apologize. It's not. Xavier, give me your Cash App. I'll send you your money back, but I'll make sure I get that question answered for you on another day. I promise you, Xavier. I definitely will get that question answered for you. On that note, y'all have a good weekend. It's Friday. Go out, enjoy yourself. Today's been a long show, but it's been a necessary show. Go out, enjoy yourself, do something special for yourself. You absolutely deserve it. There you go. Money B gave you the answer. There you go. $5 worth. That's Money B's prediction. The Baker thing, I would just say this on Baker, Money B. The only reason he's got to develop into that. And so that's what's going to happen in the offseason. He's going to have to develop into that. I do know they love Neto. It's probably pretty accurate. The only question is, can Baker actually develop into the guy that he's supposed to be? We shall see how that goes in the offseason. Y'all take care. Enjoy yourself. Remember what I would say, live each day like it was your last. One day it will be. Go out. Enjoy your weekend. You deserve it. I love you.